Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, no, this is fun. Figured I'd come back.
I'm really like blessed with your presence.
Well, yeah, okay. That's a take. I mean, I enjoy seeing you, so sure.
Today, for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is my beloved guest today. This is Aunt Voltie, and Voltie, you are like the pioneer in my mind of 7-point Highlander decks.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar with 7-point Highlander and the 8-point rule archetype, we've kind of gone a little bit back and forth on exactly how to define 8-point as it exists within 7-point Highlander. Highlander is a vintage point system format where cards have various points and you are allowed 7 points within your deck. Now, there is an exception to that rule where if you do not play any reserve list cards, you are awarded an 8th point. And you are like kind of the pioneer and the steward of 8-point as an archetype and as a deck style. What kind of led to that?
Well, I think there are a couple of factors in terms of how that happened, but realistically, the biggest driving force has been trying to get people into the format. The accessibility rule, which I believe is the official name for the 8-point rule, is essentially if you don't want to buy a dual end, you get an extra point. Or if you can't afford to have reserve list cards in your deck, you get an extra point. There are a bunch of RL cards that see a lot of play in the format that are not dual lands. Tolarian Academy, Gaia's Cradle, Mishra's Workshop. And then smaller stuff, Seeds of Innocence, Grim Monolith, Phyrexian Dreadnought. There's just a bunch of cards that are relatively expensive, but realistically it's about the dual lands. And so if you are trying to get into the format, the rule is encouraging you to be willing to play with the handicap of having worse mana, but you get the upside of having an 8th point. For the longest time, the vast majority of the community understood that the only 8-point viable decks were monocolored decks that had Sol Ring or Mana Crypt, or exactly Blue Moon. And as a committee member and an ambassador for the format, I knew that there was more to it. You know, I knew that there were a lot more options and that having a shock land sucks, but you got to do what you got to do. And I remember when I first started out, Surveil lands hadn't been printed yet, and so that was a nice pickup for the 8-point decks. But you know, not having any way for people to look at archetypes and try and work out what they can do within that space, that was something that I wanted to rectify. You know, we already don't have a deck database for 7-point, which makes it even harder if you're looking for an 8-point deck and you're trying to get into the format, but you want some idea of where to start. So in the goal of getting people interested in getting into the format, making the process a bit easier, I figured I'll build a bunch of 8-point decks for every single archetype you can think of. I will try to make them as viable as possible. Over the time, that then became, here are the non-budget 8-point decks, here are the budget 8-point decks, and here are the hyper budget, with 275 being those breakpoints. So if you want to get in, here's how you get in. And, you know, being a committee member, a lot of people find it relatively easy or relatively safe to point their friends to me, which does help. You know, here's a YouTube channel. She does a lot for the community. And so every now and then I have a new interaction with someone at a big event who says, I got into 7-point because of you. My first deck was one of your decks. And that's just really heartwarming. It's really adorable.
That feels really good.
Yeah. And that is ultimately the goal, right? You know, the weeklies are going up because people are getting invested. Every now and then I hear about someone who got into the format with a budget deck that I built who now owns 3 duels. And that is realistically the end goal. We want new people coming in. We want them to stay. We want them to have fun. We want the retention. We want everything to grow because that helps everyone.
Well, and there also has to be a part of this too that's like, you want people to feel encouraged to try Highlander as a format, and you don't want them, you know, surely something that you don't want to happen is I spent $1,000 on an Underground Sea and I lost every game, and now I feel terrible because I'm out $1,000 and I'm not doing well and I'm not enjoying the format. And A Point kind of serves as this, don't worry, you definitely don't need an Underground Sea to play the format. Here's actually an entire, 8-point Blue Moon deck that does entirely well, and the whole deck is not even $1,000.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very easy to spend a lot of money on a single card and to then not be able to use that card.
Black Lotus.
So if you're playing 7-point and you are trying to get into the format and you think about a card or a deck that you want to play, if you drop $1,000 on Gaia's Cradle so that you can make your green weenie deck work and then find out that it's not good, you are stuck with the Cradle. But if you spend all of that for the same price for an entire deck, even if that deck isn't great, or even if you want to move away from it, there's almost certainly going to be staples that you can port over to the new deck that you want to try. So if, for example, you start with mono white, when you move over to a different archetype, you'll have a Caracas, you'll have a Swords to Plowshares, you'll have 4 white fetches, 2 of which presumably will help with whatever the next deck is. So if you move to blue-black, for example, if you started with mono white and it had 4 white fetches, you already have a Marsh Flats and a Delta, and you're 2 down, And over time, in terms of expanding the collection slowly rather than in large chunks, you get to play more different things. You get to try more different things. And what ultimately happens is that the buy-in for any individual deck gets reduced over time because you already have a bunch of the pieces from other things that you've played. If you want to play mono red, for example, when you move to Grixis, you've got your Lightning Bolt, you've got your Unholy Heat. If you decided to spend $50 on a Ragavan or whatever it is now, at the very least, one of your points is organized, one of the more expensive cards in your deck is organized, you move on. But if you want to get into the format and you want to dive head first and you buy a Volcanic Island and decide, I don't want to play blue-red, there isn't another deck you can play that will have a Volcanic Island that is going to fit what you're doing. It's not going to feel good. So you're either forced to sell it, or you're stuck with it and not playing it, or you buy something else, or you sell the card and buy a different dual land and you're down the difference. And then when that dual land's not great, you're stuck moving on. So in terms of, people entering the format, the starting with 8-point and building a stable collection gives you more upgrade pathing. It means that the tree of growth is more stable. It has a better foundation. It has a more solid root system, and you're not stuck with a tiny sapling that goes straight up, basically.
What's so interesting as well is I think a lot of people initially, when they hear that it's a vintage format, they do immediately get really intimidated because vintage as a format is a quite expensive one. It's where all your mocks are. It's where all of your duels are. And I think people have this knee-jerk reaction of Highlander must be an expensive format. It must be an expensive format. The decks must be really, really expensive. And it's so funny when you'll hear this from someone who has a blinged out commander deck that's like 3 times the price of like an 8-point Dimir deck. And you sit there and you're like, you could be doing so much with this. You could be doing so much more with this if only you knew. And the similar thing, I think, even if you port over from a format like Modern, you've got fetches. You probably have a lot of staples that you don't really, if you're playing Energy, you've got Ragavans, and, Boros I don't think is super popular in 7-point right now, but it does exist. And if you played Boros in Modern, you probably have already your Flages and your Ocelot Pride and your Guide of Souls. So there's actually, there's far more, you never realize how many cards you have.
Yeah. I think one of the things when we say vintage format, I always explicitly say that it is a vintage power level eternal format, because functionally vintage decks are expensive but look very different to any other decks in Magic. So because every deck probably starts with a Lotus and several Moxen, those get played in every single archetype that wants to have access to mana, and that's where the bulk of your money is. And, a Recall and a Time Walk and a Twister, these are all very, very expensive cards. In 7-point, you get to play one of those. If you're playing Moxen, you can maybe play 2, but it's probably not even very good. And the vast majority of cards in 7-point decks are $2 commons, because that's how you need to build your deck for it to function. Every single red deck has Lightning Bolt in it, which is one of the cheapest cards of all time, because it has so many printings and you can buy them for 50 cents and you will play it in every single red deck you ever play. As opposed to, a Mox Sapphire, where you're kind of stuck with a Mox Sapphire. And because of the point-buy system, you don't get to play it in every blue deck that you decide to play. Once you expand the range of the budget to other staples of the format, you have Thoughtseize at $9, you have Inquisition at $2, you have Duress at 50 cents. Those 3 will be in the vast majority of your black decks. Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, you could get all 3 for a cheeseburger. It's not that big of a deal, right?
Cheeseburger, scry package. Cheeseburger, scry package.
Yeah, and if you buy the fetches for a deck, depending on how many colors it is, it'll either be 4, 7, or 9. Once you get to 7, when you move to a different deck, if it shares a color, you're 4 down. If you move into a different deck, you might need to pick up 2 or 3. But the difference in prices for the fetches is also very apparent, right? Like a deck like Grixis that plays 9 of the fetches and doesn't play Windswept Heath, the Arid Mesa in that deck is a third of the price of the Scalding Tarn. And you don't even need to play the Arid Mesa, or you don't even need to play the Scalding Tarn, or you don't even need to play fetches, depending on the archetype you're playing. If you're moving from Modern, I would say that because Modern is such a weird format where the most expensive cards are the threats, you get to save a bunch of money when you move to 7-point, because the most expensive cards are also threats. You don't need to buy the filler Recall and Walk when you're moving to Vintage. You need to buy the filler Brainstorm and Ponder that aren't in your Modern collection. And if you're building on a budget and you start with a list and you're depowering cards, once you cut maybe 2 or 3 cards, you've probably saved like $400 depending on what those cards are. If you want to change how the threat base looks, you can cut X card, which is $60, play a different card that costs the same amount of mana, and it maybe costs $1. And your deck will be very functionally similar, but the $10, $15, $20 you spend on the 20 staple filler cards, those are all the best in class. Brainstorm costs you $1. It is the single best blue unpointed card, and it's not close. The point being, the budget idea is very daunting when you look at the average price of a deck or the total price of the deck, but it is incredibly top-loaded. So when you move from a Dimir deck that is 7 points with a C to a Dimir deck that is 8 points without a C, that is $1,200 that you have just saved, and you get to play another pointed card. And that's why 8-point Dimir Moon is one of the better decks in the format. It's not the same as cutting, 17 cards that are all on the reserve list. It's not the same as cutting all of these cards, because you just get to play all of the best cards in those colors for a relatively cheap price.
Well, and you've made the comment to me before that the 8th point is often infinitely more valuable than the C. Like what you can do with your 8th point, what you can flex into with your 8th point can often be the difference between like doing well and doing great and how you use it.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the common things that people get stuck on is thinking about the 8-point rule and thinking that the 8th pointed card is not very valuable because it's just an extra point and you already get 7 of them. But what being 8 points can do is give you access to a lot of configurations and a lot of synergies with that 8th pointed card, especially in the grand scope of things on how these cards interact with each other. So, for example, if your 8th pointed card is just a random threat, then it is going to be less impactful. But if the 8th pointed card in a Dimir deck, for example, gets to be misstep because you have to spend the rest of your 7 points on your threats and a force, now you have access to something that breaks the play draw disparity, that protects your Murktide region from Swords to Plowshares, that you just otherwise wouldn't have had access to, because you're already going to be playing Daze Force. So you have some free interaction, but none of that is comparable to Misstep. But you had to cut Misstep because your other 7 points were better. But now your whole deck is better. And I think as long as your deck is able to function with the loss of the RL cards, then, there is a lot of validity to actively choosing 8 points as a deck. There are plenty of decks that simply don't get to exist in an 8-point version, which is the sad reality of the accessibility rule not just applying to dual lands. You can't really build an elf deck without Gaia's Cradle, for example. You don't really want to build an artifact deck without Academy or Workshop. Even Grim Monolith is on the RL. And if you are playing 3 or 4 colors, if all of your lands are shock lands, you are taking an extra 8 damage. If you're playing a 2-color deck, you're taking an extra 2 damage. And that builds up, over the course of a long event. And then there's a bunch of cards that mostly operate in the sideboard that comes up. So if your deck is really, really bad against an artifact deck and it doesn't have access to Collector Oof or Stony Silence because you're Grixis, then you kind of need to play the Null Rod, but that's on the RL. So if you decide not to and you don't have access to that card, you probably need to play like an extra 3 or 4 cards for the matchup in your sideboard. And maybe that's okay and maybe it's not. But yeah, one of the myths that I was trying to break when I was getting into building the 8 points is that it is just for budget purposes, that the rule just exists to help people and that the handicap is not worth it. And I have built many, many 8-point decks. I've built many, many 7-point decks. I firmly believe that there is a reasonably long list of decks and archetypes that would be better off being 8 points, because what you gain from the RL is simply not worth what you would gain from the 8th point. I think the vast majority of Boros decks, for example, should be 8 points because Plateau is not that important. The 2 damage is less important in Boros. The only RL card that you would even think about playing is Null Rod, but because you're in Boros, you get access to Stony Silence and Clarion Conqueror, as well as any amount of shatters that you want. And the 8th point is going to be a real card for those decks. Maybe it's a Strip Mine, maybe it's a Skull Clamp, maybe it's Flage, maybe it's 4th, or maybe you get to upgrade a 2-point or a 3-point card to a slightly bigger one. So I think Boros is one of the bigger ones. I think Dimir Moon is actually much, much better as an 8-point deck because all of those cards are really, really good. And then a lot of the Sol Ring Mana Crypt decks should probably be 8 points. Mono White Weenie should definitely be 8 points, for example. And yeah, I think it's just a deck building space that people have ignored for a long time. And I wanted to get stuck in. I was the pioneer, I guess. Obviously, people had been building 8-point decks, but I'm fairly confident no one has built as many as I have, and definitely not filmed deck techs for them. So happy to help.
Well, and you have so much knowledge, experience. You have format knowledge. You're a part of the committee, like the 7-point committee as well. You have what I would consider like an infinite hub of information, and you actually do tutoring and you do deck building services as well. How did you kind of find yourself in those lanes? There are plenty of people who are fantastic players. They are constantly top 8 players, and they don't tutor. They don't, and they don't publish guides in the same way, or sideboard guides or deck techs or anything. So how did you find yourself in the lane of, not only pioneering 8-point and, trying to help people get into the format, but offering like your very valuable services of, I will help you become a better player. I'll help you be a better player. I will teach you and like pass on the information that I have to you, as well as also providing like deck building services.
It was mostly a slow burn this time round. I have done a lot of coaching and teaching for Magic in the past, um, both in Magic and poker, for example. One of the big things that I think most people aren't aware of is that being good at Magic does not make you a good teacher, and being good at teaching does not work if you're not good at Magic. So it is a very, very small subset of people who are able to do both. And I think it is a pretty solid and valuable service to the people who need it. It's definitely not for everyone. There are people who would just prefer to play every week, try and get a little bit better every now and then. But there are people who are stagnant or they've plateaued and they don't know how to get better. And a helping hand from someone who actually knows what they're doing is really, really valuable. And if my fees were not reasonable and my time wasn't well used and I wasn't good at it, people wouldn't keep coming back. They wouldn't, help. They wouldn't encourage their friends to reach out. And so what ended up happening, especially this time around, is as a content creator, a lot of people can see how I think about the game. They can see how I build decks, how I play decks, see that I do well at events. And for the most part, I think that I am very, very different to a lot of people in the space in terms of how I approach the game, how I think about the game. I play games of Magic in my head 24/7. That is just how it operates. If I have a brainworm for a deck, I'm running it against other decks passively, which is horrible, but, what are you going to do? And so there are a bunch of people who are reaching out being like, I want to get better at Magic. How do we do this? How do I do this? And I realized that I probably couldn't just help people for the sake of helping people, because then everyone would do it. I would have to be picky. I would have to be choosy, and it would just be really, really exhausting. And the end result would be that they would get a worse experience. I would be having a worse time. So instead, here's a price. I think this is fair. If you think this is fair, you can opt in. I will spend that amount of time dedicated to helping you. And over time, all of my students who have been with me for a fair amount of time have seen their results improve over the course of events. They're winning an extra 1.5 rounds. They're feeling more confident in their games. They're playing better. They're making fewer mistakes. And the longer they're with me, the better they'll get. And ideally, eventually, someone will top 8 a big event, and it will be in large part due to me, which would be gas, on top of the hard work that they're putting in training. The deck building aspect is actually quite separate, oddly enough. It has nothing to do with teaching for the most part, because some people just have a deck that they want a second pair of eyes. And if you ask your friends or you ask the local play group, here's my deck, how do I fix it? You are going to get a very mixed bag of responses. You are going to get people who don't understand how your deck works. They don't understand how the format looks. They're going to have their own pet cards and their own biases. And every person you ask for advice is going to give you different advice. And it is impossible, as the person asking, to find out which advice is best. So what do? Do you trust yourself and waste all of this advice you've been given? Do you pick someone and trust them and find out that they were wrong? Or do you ask the person who is way too smart and knows way too much about the game and ask her to fix your thing?
Yeah.
And it didn't start out as a fee for service by any stretch. It was just every single time there was a big event on the horizon, my DMs would fill up.
Yeah.
Here's my deck. Here's what I want it to do. Please save me. I would then do it, give them the changes, do 3-4 pages on a Google Doc of a write-up.
Oh my gosh.
Here's why these cards are different. Here's how this deck is going to play out differently. And they'd be like, hell yeah. And then
then they'd leave.
Yeah. And that kind of got exhausting for me, if I'm honest. I do it, quote unquote, for the love of the game, but as more and more of these requests came in and as I spent more and more time on them, I also realized that I should probably be charging for this.
Was like doing it for a love of the game doesn't pay rent.
Yeah.
Like you can't pay your rent in doing it for a love of the game.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, there are parts of Magic as a hobby that should stay as a hobby. But if someone is sending you a request and it is essentially, here is a ticket, add it to your queue, I will get the ticket response. That system is a lot better, and it is much more, it is much better oiled if there is an actual physical, simple thing to do. I set myself a rough time limit for how long to do each job in. I set reasonable prices, you know, $5 for a deck doctor. It takes me maybe an hour. There you go. Here's the Google link. Send me any questions you have. And everyone, for the most part, feels that they are getting quite a lot out of the money that they're spending, because they play the deck, it feels better, they start winning more. You know, I did a deck doctor maybe 3 or 4 days ago, and the person DM'd me that night who went to a weekly and went 3-1, and they said the deck felt much better. And I was like, yes, good job. You know,
Well, and part of what you're doing is you're unlocking expertise, because what you are providing as well is years of experience, years of knowledge, years of tournaments, years of testing. You know, you're not just some girl from the shop, right? You know, you have results and experience to back it up. And so you have something worthwhile to say. And what's worthwhile is worthwhile.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, it's kind of hard to label yourself as an expert in a field that is very subjective, where there aren't objective metrics and KPIs that you can point to. For the most part, everyone tells me that I'm very, very good at deck building and very, very good at the game. So I'm kind of just trusting the crowd in that sense.
Mhm.
And if people are willing to trust me implicitly when I provide all of this information and do all of this teaching and build something for them that they wouldn't have intuitively built, when they trust me implicitly, they know that whatever they're doing and whatever they're getting into is backed by someone that they feel they can trust to know what they're doing. Because that's not really an option, right? If you find a deck list online from an event, you have very little idea of what went into that deck and how that day played out, unless you know the person specifically and ask them, for example. It's very easy to think that someone has built a deck and spent 20 years on it and has honed the craft, and realize later that they borrowed the deck from a friend and hadn't played a match till the day of. And you just don't get to know. Where I've been very, very open about everything that I've done, everything that I've achieved, how I approach the game, what I do. And if that is enough for you, send me a message. Simple as that.
You are a very, very fantastic, like, accomplished Magic player. And to kind of round us out, there is something that has been, I think I've said this, I think other people have said this to me as well. People have said, Vi could win a game of Magic with a ham sandwich.
Mhm.
And that, I believe, is like, it's meant to be a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's also meant to really just underscore the reach of your skill expression is incredibly high. And we discussed, you did this $150 content deck for Canberra, and you placed top 4 with it.
Mhm.
And then you told people, don't build this deck just because I top 4'd with it. This was 95% skill expression, 5% surprise. Do you kind of agree with this sentiment? Like, when people, people talk about your prowess and about how good you are as a Magic player, is this something that kind of like rings true, and how does it make you feel?
It feels a bit strange because at the same time, deck selection is a real skill. There are a bunch of skills in Magic that are external, and realistically, if you are trying to win an event, you should not be registering a pile of Uno cards and Miss Baker from down the road. But if you end up with that, maybe you're going to have to bluff your way through some spots. Maybe you're going to have to play a green 3 to counter a lightning bolt. And what has happened, and I think this applies to a lot of people who have this aura around them, I guess.
This je ne sais quoi.
Yeah,
This magic je ne sais quoi.
What happened was my upbringing with magic. It's as simple as that. I am not, a red mage or a blue mage. I have never played the same thing for very long. And a lot of my magic experience growing up was being kind of broke, borrowing whatever was available, playing whatever formats were upcoming and events that were happening. So I've played pretty much everything you can think of at least one tournament, if not multiple. And then the Modo rental program stuff started, and I realized that now I could play every format and I could play every deck on stream, and I could just kind of have fun. What happens is you build up this knowledge base of every single kind of interaction between cards, and you understand how every single card interacts within a deck that you would expect, that you can Build-A-Bear combos, mid-game. You can figure things out on the fly. And what happens is just a lot of weird instances where people don't realize that this is because you know too much about the game.
Mm-hmm.
You go to an event to play Commander with your friends on a pre-release night. You all open a pre-con, and Vi on turn 6 has assembled an infinite combo because she gained control of a specific creature in one of the other precons.
Yeah.
And now these 4 cards put together deck everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That's happened twice.
I'm not making this I'm not making this up. This actually happened.
That's happened twice in 2 different times.
Well, it's like if I had a nickel for every time this happened, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I've played everything in every format in every range. I know how Manaless Dredge works. I know how lands works. I know how Death and Taxes and Show and Tell and Grixis Devil work. And in 7 Point and in other formats as well, you see the same things. And you see a lot of the things that have existed throughout time come up a bunch. So you understand how these interactions happen. You see them in advance. And then you kind of figure it out on the fly. You think, okay, well, if my opponent is going to try and make a Marit Lage, what are the cards in my deck that can answer it? How many Marit Lages can I beat? How long is it going to take to beat these? And what do I need to do to facilitate that? If you've played Legacy Miracles before, you know that you have 2 Caracases, 4 Swords to Plowshares, some Terminuses. And if you have to go through 7 or 8 Marit Lages, you will. And at some point, your Jace will ultimate and the game will be over. Your opponent is on 120 life. Who cares? And so, this just kind of incredible encyclopedic knowledge of the vast majority of playable Magic cards throughout history leads you both to knowing how weird interactions work, seeing the emergent gameplay in advance and playing towards it. But it also means that whenever you think of a problem in your deck, when you're deck building, or you find a gap in it, you know the super specific shadow more common that fixes that problem that no one else would see. You register that card. Everyone in the tournament has to read it when you play it, and they all get put in the dirt. Invasion of Gobekhan is a very recent one because who knows what battles are or what they do. But I read the card when I was trying to build some kind of Lurrus pile. And so my Scryfall search was white or black permanents that cost 2 or less. And it showed up. And I was like, I should read this card. And then I realized it was completely bonkers and was easily one of the best interactive pieces that any white creature deck could ever play. And every one of my opponents who I've ever played that card against has read it, paused, reread it, taken it out of the sleeve, read the back, reread the front, and gone, huh. That's pretty good.
That's good. Well, because the back is Light Shield Array.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then they die. So
I play Invasion of Gobakon, I win the game. Well, and so do you feel kind of, there's this, especially amongst, the Highlander community and the Magic players here, in Melbourne, there is this feeling that, like, you are one of the greats. Do you feel a lot of that pressure? People say, you can win with a ham sandwich. Do you feel a lot of that pressure, or are you just kind of, I'm just that good? Because I know as well, like, it's very atypical in Australian kind of, social culture to, it's the whole, like, tall poppy thing of, like, you don't actually want to say you're that good. You're not supposed to say that you're that good, but
it's not necessarily pressure, although, I mean, I have felt the pressure to perform sometimes. I tend not to gloat. I'm usually very, very self-deprecating. However, it's hard to be self-deprecating when you consistently put everyone in the dirt with whatever you want.
When you top 4 with $150 white weedy deck, it's hard to look into the camera and say, I'm not that good.
Yeah. Like, when your friend knows that you're about to meet him in the finals of a weekly, and he says to you, I'm about to die to Thraben Inspector, aren't I? And I say, yeah, you are.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And then he dies to Thraben Inspector. Like,
I see the prophecy, I read the prophecy, I experience the prophecy, I die.
Yeah, and then we played a couple of weeks later at a bigger event, and I played Thraben Inspector on 1 in a different deck.
And he died.
And he's like, I think I have to force this. And I paused and I said, well, if you don't, it's going to hit you like 9 times because you're going to have to answer everything else. He's like, yeah, I know. And then you get to crack a clue and I'll be on 10. I'm going to force this. And I said, okay. And put it in the graveyard. Like,
this is, is it Force of Will?
Yeah.
This is your $100 counterspell in my 60-cent common.
Yep. To both of our credits.
It was the right choice.
Yeah. Yep. If he didn't, I think it would have soloed him. It would have threatened all of his planeswalkers. He would have, like, because he ended up answering everything I did for the next, like, 4 turns. But if he didn't, that Thraben Inspector would have hit him 4 times in that time. And he ended the game on, like, 2. So.
What's, like, I need to make a shirt that has Thraben Inspector on it. It says, like, they hate to see me coming.
It's a little guy that provides a lot of value, and no one sees the value in it. But I register 2 all the time, and it is cracked every time. And it's hard when everyone thinks that you're really, really good, but they also won't listen to you on certain things, and they won't trust you. And where you end up trying to strike the balance is, okay, how many of these cards in her deck are unplayable, and she did well in spite of that? And how many of these cards are actually just good and we haven't tried them yet? One of the things that happened very, very recently is that I was building a shops deck to play against someone in the VFN Season 3 Challenge bout. And my shop sideboard had a Null Elemental Blast. For those of you who don't know, it is a colorless mana instant, counter target multicolored spell, or destroy target multicolored permanent. Incredibly niche card. No one has played it at all in the format. And I ended up not being able to play it, but I had a chat with someone the next day who said, I sent the shops list to everyone who plays shops in the country. They're all really confused about a bunch of these choices. Why are you playing a Null Elemental Blast? And I said, because your deck can't beat Culling Ritual, which is a 2 black-green sorcery. It also can't beat Psychic Frog.
I was gonna say Psychic Frog is the first thing that came to my mind.
And he paused and he was like, I think I need to try this card. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you do. Yeah, I win in spite of a lot of the bad cards that I play, but I don't play bad cards for the sake of it. There is always a purpose. There is always a method to the madness. I don't play a card like Thraben Inspector because I think it's just cute and fun to play a bad card in my deck. I play it because for a 1-drop, it has a lot of text. It has 2 toughness. It blocks Ragavan profitably. It threatens planeswalkers without having a real cost attached, because you'll crack the clue at some point, and now you're not even down a card for your 1-mana 1/2. I play it because I think it genuinely serves a purpose in the deck that people don't really see. So when I play a cute pet card and people think it is just a cute pet card, often they get caught off guard when it does end up performing.
Yeah.
You know, Search for Azcanta is a big one. I've been talking about that card in 7 Point for a long time. Everyone refuses to play it.
Really?
It's blue rampant growth that draws you 4 cards and ends the game after a period of time.
It is a good card.
Like, if you resolve it in a matchup where resolving something matters, the extra mana is going to matter, the extra cards are going to matter, and at some point, they're just going to lose the game. And it's a land which is really, really hard to interact with. Like, lands are the second hardest type to interact with after enchantments, which is the front side. So I end up coming across as a mad scientist, like very, very commonly. That is my community views me as the witch in the woods who, you stay away from because she's super threatening. But every now and then she crawls out of the woodworks and she heals the children of the plague. And then she disappears again.
She crawls out of the woods. She slides a null elemental blast across the ground and then retreats.
Yeah. Like, you put a plate of fruit at the edge of the forest, and then a green elixir comes out, and you feed it to your kid, and now your kid doesn't have tuberculosis. But you would never go to her house to talk to her because that would be terrifying.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Would you like to plug all of your amazing videos and content and where people can find you and where people can hook up with you for your tutoring and deck building services?
Yeah, absolutely. So on YouTube, I am Aunt Voltie. On Twitch, I am Aunt Voltie. I stream multiple times a week. YouTube has a bunch of deck techs and, stats videos and whatnot. There's a long library of decks in there if you want to go check them out. I would recommend joining my Discord server if you want to join my tournaments that I run, which is the VFN series. The Discord server also has a great way to reach out to people and connect if you want to talk about different formats, for example. But realistically, once you connect to that Discord, that is probably the best way to reach out to me to inquire about coaching. However, I do have a website, which I'll happily drop the link to, and on that website, there are several Google Forms where you can fill out name, detail, email, and what kind of service you're requesting. Those come through to my email and they get added to the queue. And then from there, there are a lot of different ways you can find me. Most people just have a chat with me at big events for 7 Point. I don't leave the house very often, but when I do, people tend to notice. So, if you want to come have a chat, more than happy to. But otherwise, for socials, Aunt Voltie on everything.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I can't wait to be put in the dirt and put in my place.
I have a spicy brew cooking at the moment for Wednesday.
Ooh. I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah, there was a period where I was playing the weeklies at POG, and I think I won 5 or 6 tournaments out of like a 7-week period. And all of those decks were complete garbage that were put together from scraps in a box.
Ham sandwiches.
Some of them had 5 points. Some of them had 7 basics. It was just literally piles of cards because I was bored.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you so much for joining us today. That's all we've got for you. We'll be back again next week. New episodes released on Mondays at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. You can keep track of all of our releases at Raise MTG on Instagram and Blue Sky. You can find me at Kira Bobira, and you can find beloved Maya in absentia at Maya MTG. A huge thank you to the Hen House for the use of their recording studio. We'll see you next week.